The battle for Ukraine may be fueled by cultural tensions, and it may seem to be a war of nostalgic ideals, but the catalyst to this crisis is far less romanticized. This intense situation is an issue of economic proportions, and was instigated by a desire for economic change. As we can see here, Ukraine is torn in two by a deep cultural divide that is centuries in the making, but that cultural rift has had more than just a social impact. Native Russian-speaking Ukrainians, seen here according to this map in red, have drawn a line politically that has affected the economic direction of Ukraine. This same region in red voted for the Russian-leaning Yanukovych for the presidency in favor of closer economic and political ties with Russia. So although the root of this crisis may be deep cultural divides, the spark that ignited this fire was all economic. So why is Ukraine so interested in economic change? Ukraine's economic status on a global level is among the worst in Europe. It is part of a group known as the Global South, a term used to describe less developed countries. As seen here according to this map, the countries shaded in red are all part of this group. These are most of the countries in the southern hemisphere, hence the term Global South. But Ukraine is only one of two countries in the north to be classified in this economically undeveloped way. So how then is it that this European country can be in the same economic status as less developed countries? This is tied to many historical causes, mostly including the fact that Russia's political stronghold and influence over the region has put Ukraine in this position. This is mostly caused by the fact that Ukraine's natural resources have been exploited for many centuries. The reality is that Ukraine was developed technologically and industrially under Soviet rule, so Ukraine's economy was designed to serve Soviet purposes. This Soviet influence can best be seen when we look at the native population map showing the Great Divide and Russian presence in Ukraine. When we transpose this image over a map illustrating the centers of industry in Ukraine, we can see the real cause of this crisis unfolding and the threat to Ukraine's economy. Here it is made clear for us that Ukraine's industries are mostly located in the Russian-influenced eastern part of the countries. Secession of this region would have catastrophic effects on Ukraine's economy. The reason so many industries are located in this region were for Soviet purposes. This map demonstrates the same reality. This one illustrates the location of manufacturing industries. Notice there is a strong line of industry to the east, and although there is some manufacturing scattered among both regions, the most telling of Ukraine's economic future is in the fact that most of the scientific institutions are located in the Russian-influenced east. Here we get to look at the natural resources and mineral concentrations in Ukraine. Once again, though Ukraine is rich in precious resources, the concentration is greatest in the east. A great depiction of Soviet influence and the purpose of Ukraine served for them can best be seen according to this map. Ukraine inherited 1/3 of the Soviet defense industry, and that includes about 85 scientific organizations which specialize in the development of armaments and military equipment, as well as an air and space complex. Military assembly plants, including missile, aircraft, electronics, shipbuilding, and land arms, are all mostly located in the east. To further complicate matters, Ukraine has a strong nuclear capability with several power plants located within its borders, the largest of which being located in the east. This is the largest power plant in all of Europe, operating 6 power units. It is clear to see why Western Ukrainians are so eager to sever ties with their former ruler in an effort to establish their own sufficient economy. So at the heart of the crisis is a fight over the globalization of natural resources and economic industry. For example, Ukraine depends on Russia for up to 70% of its natural gas. In December, Putin offered a bailout for cheaper Russian gas and a $15 billion loan, which prompted the current crisis. This deal was accepted by Yanukovych in exchange for a rejection of the EU deal, something Russia has been eager to prevent. However, as protests escalated in Ukraine and Yanukovych fled to Russia, Russia's state-run natural gas giant announced that that discounted rate no longer applied and it would begin charging near double the amount Ukrainians were already unable to pay. Ukraine already owes Russia upwards of $1.5 billion, a figure that Putin said could rise to $2 billion if February's gas payments weren't received on time. This fight over natural gas has been a long contended point of frustration, because Russia has often turned off gas supplies because of payment disputes. Russia has always used gas as an instrument of influence. This natural resource game not only affects Ukraine, but also the rest of Europe, who depends on the globalized gas supplies from Russia as well, with around 80% being funneled through a network of supply lines through Ukraine. This exploitation of Ukraine for its location and resources is an example of how globalization may encourage poverty, denying a nation its ability to create its own economy. The traditional IPE theory includes analysis of the political economy of international trade, finance, North-South relations, and multinational corporations. We can see all of that analysis here in the crisis in Ukraine. Most often, the study of globalization concentrates on Africa and deals made there exchanging trade for aid. But the UNDP is also at work doing the same concept in Ukraine as part of a project for a wider Europe. To accomplish this, UNDP is providing support for the Ukrainian government through trade policy making, trade negotiations, and trade policy implementation reform, as well as small business help. Aside from UNDP, the EU remains an open door for economic change in Ukraine despite the original rejection of the EU deal. The EU has offered almost €500 million a year of trade relief as the Ukrainian government seeks to fend off bankruptcy and Russian encroachment, as well as open its doors to exports from Ukraine, giving a real boost to Ukrainian companies. This kind of trade for aid and trade policy reforms are all an example of the IPE theory at work in Ukraine. The country's vast agricultural potential, highly educated population, transportation networks, and technological infrastructure inherited from the Soviet Union provided Ukraine with an excellent precondition for a strong economic growth. Many believed it would quickly rival its former ruler once it gained independence in 1991, but instead it took a go-slow approach to its economy. Many observers believe that corruption is what hinders investment. Ukraine consistently ranks among the most corrupt countries. In Ukraine, a group commonly referred to as the oligarchs control a significant portion of the economy, particularly in mass media, energy, and heavy industries such as chemicals and steel. The highly contested and rebel-pursued Donetsk Oblast region has the highest concentration of coal and a wealth of steel and iron mining and metallurgy. It is Ukraine's most populous region, and it is heavily industrialized, representing a sizable chunk of the Ukrainian economy. Yanukovych was careful to prop up industry here, and he maintained a close alliance with Ukraine's richest man, who owns much of the industrial enterprise in the region, a person also known as an oligarch. Throughout this crisis, Ukraine's industrial east has been mostly quiet, with only about 30% who favored the EU deal and most wanting closer ties with Russia. Many of these people parrot Yanukovych's claim that Ukraine is not yet ready for closer ties with the EU, a claim Western Ukrainians see as nothing more than an attempt to hinder Ukraine's independent progress toward globalization and economic advancement.